His hands trembled as he wrote words that could get him killed, not by the enemy, by his own officers. June 4th, 1943. A German soldier sits on a train rolling through Texas, staring out the window in complete disbelief. Every farmhouse blazing with electric light at 10 p.m., every street corner illuminated, an endless constellation of electricity stretching across the plains. In Germany, his homeland had been plunged into darkness since 1940. Rural areas barely had electricity at all. He writes in his hidden diary, "The Americans must be lying to us. No nation could possess such abundance while fighting a war on two fronts." But they weren't lying. And what this soldier was about to discover would shatter everything the Nazis had told him. This is the story of how 371,000 Nazi prisoners of war were psychologically destroyed, not by torture or propaganda, but by simply witnessing American abundance with their own eyes. May 13th, 1943. Tunisia, North Africa. General Jürgen von Arnim surrenders along with approximately 250,000 German and Italian soldiers. These were the Wehrmacht's most experienced desert fighters, men who had driven the British back to Egypt. Among them was Hauptmann Friedrich Rathke, holder of the Iron Cross First Class, veteran of the France campaign, wounded twice in North Africa. His diary would provide historians with the most detailed account of what was about to happen. The journey began at the port of Oran, Algeria. As Rathke and 30,000 other prisoners waited for transport ships, American efficiency was already cracking their preconceptions. But the first real shock came with the food. Oberfeldwebel Hans Müller wrote to his mother, "The Americans fed us better than we had eaten in 6 months of desert warfare. White bread, real coffee, meat twice a day. We thought it was propaganda. We didn't realize this was their standard military ration." Their standard ration was better than what elite German soldiers had received during active combat. The Liberty ships carrying them across the Atlantic were monuments to American industrial capacity. The SS Robert E. Peary had been built in 4 days, 15 hours and 29 minutes. These vessels were produced at a rate of 3 per day at peak production. Feldwebel Kurt Zimmermann wrote, "The ship's crew disposed of more food waste each day than my entire company had received in weekly rations. The American sailors threw away half-eaten steaks, whole loaves of bread, gallons of milk. They did this openly because to them this waste meant nothing. Their supply was limitless." Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm von Tauben would later write, "As our ship approached the American coast, I watched the radar antenna rotating above the bridge. This technology, which we believed only we possessed in limited quantities, was standard equipment on a cargo vessel. It was then I first suspected that Germany had already lost the war." August 2nd, 1943, Norfolk, Virginia. The first sight of America shattered the last remnants of Nazi propaganda. The Norfolk base sprawled across 4,300 acres. In a single day, this one port handled more tonnage than the entire German port of Hamburg managed in a week. Gefreiter Johann Weber counted 47 cargo ships in various stages of loading. He noted, "Each crane lifted loads that would have required 12 men and horses in Germany. They moved with electric power, smoothly, continuously, without the coal smoke that choked our industrial cities." Along the route to the trains, they passed parking lots filled with hundreds of civilian automobiles. In Germany, private automobile ownership remained a privilege of the wealthy and party elite. Here, ordinary dock workers drove to work in their own cars. But nothing prepared them for the trains themselves. Not boxcars, but full passenger coaches. Pullman cars with padded seats that converted to sleeping berths. Dining cars with white tablecloths. Observation cars with panoramic windows. Hauptmann Rathke wrote, "We boarded like tourists, not prisoners. One sergeant apologized that the air conditioning wasn't working properly. Air conditioning. In August, we had believed such luxury existed only in Hitler's personal train." The 3-day train journey would prove more destructive to Nazi ideology than any military defeat. Every small town blazed with illumination. Martinsville, Danville, Greensboro, communities that in Germany would have been lucky to have a single electric street lamp displayed illuminated shop windows, electric signs, houses with lights burning in multiple rooms. Oberfeldwebel-Meyer wrote, "We passed through dozens of cities that first night. Each one had more electricity than all of Hamburg. The guards told us this was normal, that every American town had electricity since the 1920s. I called him a liar. He just shrugged and said we would see." The prisoners watched American railway workers perform in 30 minutes what would have taken 2 hours in Germany. The workers wore leather boots that would have cost a German laborer 2 months' wages. They drank Coca-Cola and threw the empties away without thought. They smoked cigarettes continuously, stubbing them out half-finished. Feldwebel Heinrich Müller calculated, "The single railway yard used more electricity in 1 hour than my entire district in Berlin used in a day. They left lights burning in empty buildings. It was the carelessness of infinite resource." As the trains crossed Tennessee and Kentucky, they encountered American industrial power in full display. The Alcoa aluminum plant in Tennessee stretched for 3 miles, consuming 175,000 kilowatts of power, more than the entire city of Munich. Near Louisville, 4 massive synthetic rubber facilities produced 800,000 tons annually. Germany had never managed more than 120,000 tons in its best year. Oberleutnant Erich Hoffmann, a chemist from IG Farben, understood immediately. Each facility was more advanced than anything we had built, and there were 4 of them just in this one location. They told us there were dozens more across the country. The trains passed Ford's Willow Run plant outside Detroit. This single factory produced a B-24 Liberator bomber every 63 minutes. Hauptmann Werner counted 17 B-24s visible from the train. We had been told American planes were inferior, but I could see the precision of the assembly lines. These were simply built faster than we could imagine possible. In St. Louis, they crossed the Mississippi River, while below, barges carried more grain than the entire German harvest of 1942. Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt wrote, "I watched them loading a single barge with enough wheat to feed my entire village for 5 years. The crane operator was eating a sandwich with meat thicker than our weekly ration." Camp Hearn, Texas, built in just 4 months, housed prisoners in conditions that exceeded what most had known as civilians. Wooden barracks with electric lights, flush toilets, hot showers, and steam heat. The camp hospital astounded the medical personnel. Oberstleutnant Dr. Friedrich Bauer found himself in a facility better equipped than most German civilian hospitals. Dr. Bauer testified, "They had penicillin, this miracle drug we had only heard rumors about. They used it freely, even on prisoners with minor infections. German soldiers were dying for want of basic drugs, and the Americans were giving us their most advanced medicine without hesitation." Feldwebel Otto Krebs, a former chef, wrote, "Today we threw away more food than my family has seen in 3 years. Not spoiled food, simply excess. The American regulations require 10% more than needed. The surplus is discarded. I wept as I threw perfectly good bread into the garbage." By September 1943, prisoners were employed in fields and factories. Groups were trucked daily to work sites, traveling through the American heartland. They saw everything. The endless fields, the factories running 3 shifts, the shops full of goods, the parking lots full of cars. At a cotton gin outside Houston, Unteroffizier Herbert Lang watched a single machine process more cotton in 1 hour than his entire village could have handled in a month. The farmer was nobody special, not aristocracy, not a party member, just a farmer. Yet he had electricity, running water, a truck, a car, and a tractor. His workers, including the Negroes, ate lunch containing more food than German workers received in a week, and this was normal. In Nebraska, A single combine harvester could do the work of 100 men. Gefreiter Wilhelm Hoffmann wrote, "The farmer's son, a boy of 16, drove a tractor worth more than everything my father had earned in his lifetime. When I mentioned this, the boy laughed and said it wasn't even a particularly good tractor." At a Campbell's soup factory in New Jersey, prisoners watched production lines that processed more tomatoes in a day than most German factories handled in a month. Stabsfeldwebel Ernst Wagner documented, "Everything was automated. One elderly woman monitored controls that managed what would have required 50 workers in Germany. She did this while listening to a radio and drinking coffee." By winter 1943, the cumulative impact was producing what American intelligence called ideological collapse syndrome. The Special Projects Division documented increasing numbers of prisoners requesting access to American newspapers, books, and educational materials. Major Paul Neuland reported, "The prisoners no longer argue when shown production statistics. They have seen too much. The most fanatical Nazis have become quiet. Many openly question what they were told about America." Lieutenant Hermann Goetz wrote, "We were told America was a mongrel nation, weak, divided, incapable of military prowess. Every day I see the opposite. This is the most organized, unified, and powerful nation on earth. We were told fairy tales by criminals." Christmas 1943 provided the most profound psychological impact. American organizations, churches, and civic groups sent 500,000 Christmas packages to German prisoners, enemies who had been trying to kill American soldiers months earlier. Local communities invited prisoners to Christmas dinners. At Camp Herne, the Methodist Church choir performed Christmas carols in German. Women sent homemade cookies. The Boy Scouts delivered handmade Christmas cards. This kindness shattered the final remnants of Nazi racial theory. Oberleutnant Walter Müller, whose brother died in the Hamburg bombing, wrote, "They know we are their enemies. Many have sons fighting against our armies. Yet they show us Christian charity, not propaganda, but genuine kindness." What kind of people treat enemies this way? Only those absolutely certain of victory and secure in their power. The Christmas feast defied comprehension. Turkey, ham, mashed potatoes, gravy, vegetables, pies, ice cream, quantities Germany hadn't seen since before the First World War. Feldwebel Hans Becker wrote, "We ate like kings, better than German generals, and this was not special." The guards told us this was a normal American Christmas dinner. If they can feed prisoners this way, what must their own soldiers eat? Over 40,000 German prisoners were enrolled in educational programs. They studied English, American history, mathematics, and sciences. The University of Chicago provided correspondence courses. Stanford sent professors to lecture on democracy and economics. Hauptmann Dr. Wilhelm von Braun attended lectures on atomic physics. He wrote, "American professors, including Jewish refugees from Germany, taught us without hatred. They were years ahead of German research, and they shared knowledge with enemies. This generosity was incomprehensible to minds shaped by Nazi ideology." The theaters showed American films, not propaganda, but regular Hollywood productions. Gone with the Wind, The Grapes of Wrath. Lieutenant Joseph Kramer wrote, "They hide nothing. They show their problems, their failures, yet this honesty makes them stronger. In Germany, such criticism would mean death. Here it is considered patriotic." June 6, 1944. When news of the Normandy invasion reached the camps, German prisoners experienced their final ideological collapse. The scale demonstrated American organizational capacity beyond Nazi Germany's wildest dreams. 6,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 150,000 men in the first wave. Oberst Friedrich von Tauben wrote, "We knew then that everything was lost, not just the war, but the entire Nazi project. We had challenged the world's greatest industrial power with fairy tales and racial mythology. We sent horses against their trucks, rifles against their automatic weapons, courage against their unlimited resources." April 1945, brought the final revelation. As American forces liberated concentration camps, the footage was shown to German prisoners. The evidence was overwhelming. The psychological impact was devastating. Men who had maintained some pride in German honor now faced the complete moral collapse of their nation. Hauptmann Walter Schmidt wrote, "We thought we were warriors for a great cause. We discovered we were tools of criminals. We believed we were bringing civilization to inferior peoples. We found that we were the barbarians. The Americans we called weak and decadent showed us what civilization actually meant." Between 1945 and 1946, 371,783 German prisoners were repatriated. They returned to a Germany divided, destroyed, and destitute. But they brought something precious: knowledge of how a democratic industrial society functioned. American authorities provided vocational training, agricultural education, and political instruction. Many former prisoners rose to prominence in West Germany's reconstruction. Hans Kroll became West German ambassador to the United States. Walter Hallstein became president of the European Commission. Rüdiger von Weckmar served as German permanent representative to the United Nations. Eduard Ackermann became a leader in German agricultural reform. They brought American methods to German industry, American efficiency to German agriculture, and American democratic ideals to German politics. Hans Kroll wrote, "We learned that prosperity came from freedom, not conquest. We saw that democracy created wealth, that diversity brought strength. These lessons, learned as prisoners, shaped the new Germany." In 1985, over 500 former prisoners returned to America for a reunion in Austin, Texas, many bringing their families. Former Oberst Hermann Göring, then 78 years old, delivered the keynote address. "We came to America as enemies, as Nazis, as believers in a lie. We left as friends, as Democrats, as men who had seen the truth. America showed us that strength comes not from conquest, but from production, not from hatred, but from diversity, not from tyranny, but from freedom. We witnessed the arsenal of democracy at full production. We returned to Germany with a mission, to build a society that could create rather than destroy. The Germany that rose from the ashes was built on lessons learned in American prison camps. To America, from your former enemies, now your friends. Thank you for showing us the way." The auditorium erupted in standing ovation. Americans and Germans together, former enemies united in recognition of a transformation that had seemed impossible in 1943. The statistics tell the story. Over 500 camps across 45 states, 371,683 German prisoners, only 2,222 escape attempts, just 0.6%, 0 successful permanent escapes. By 1945, 95% of prisoners rated their treatment as good or excellent. 74% believed captivity positively changed their worldview. Less than 10% maintained strong Nazi beliefs by the war's end. Approximately 5,000 former prisoners immigrated to the United States. Over 12,000 maintained correspondence with American families for an average of 31 years. The story of German prisoners in America is ultimately a story of redemption through revelation. It proves that sometimes the greatest victories are won not through destruction, but through demonstration. Not through propaganda, but through prosperity. Not through hatred, but through humanity. In the end, that was America's secret weapon, not just the ability to produce more tanks and planes than any nation in history, but the capacity to transform enemies into friends through the simple power of example. The prisoners were stunned by America's industrial might, but more importantly, they were changed by it, and in that change lay the foundation for a better world. If you found this story fascinating, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're diving deep into the untold stories that shaped our modern world. Drop a comment below telling us what surprised you most. History isn't just about battles and generals, it's about the moments that transform enemies into friends and hatred into hope. And that's a story worth telling.